right, you guys are probably in here either to review or you missed the lesson on October the 9th. That would be a Friday. Yesterday we talked about the tax acts. Some of them we talked about the Sugar Act. We talked about the Quartering Act, and let's not forget that that they were taxing the colonies because of the debt left over from the French and Indian War. You just can't answer debt. You have to tell me French and Indian War. So the Sugar Act taxed things like sugar and molasses. They didn't appreciate it. A lot of the colonists they work with smuggled goods, and now all of a sudden they have to pay a tax on that. And whenever you increase prices, you decrease profits. And so the colonists really didn't like that. And then the Quartering Act, like you see right here, the soldiers, the colonists rather, were required to let the soldiers in, and they had to give them room to stay. Think about your house. You got four corners in most houses, four quarters in a dollar. So we call that the Quartering Act. And then we'll start with today's work. So today we talked about the Stamp Act, and basically papers back then had to have a stamp on it. The stamp proved that you paid for those things. But the thing is that paper is like cell phones today. Paper back then are like cell phones today. If they didn't communicate with somebody in person, they did it over paper, and so they had to start doing that. And things that were tax were like diplomas, contracts, wills, and the big one right here, newspapers. Newspapers was a huge thing. That'd be the equivalent of us anytime we open up our phones and we look for information on like social media or even through the websites and things like that. We are looking for information, and that's what newspapers were to them. Newspapers back then was information for them. The only difference between them that back then, well, not the only difference, but one of the biggest difference between them back then and us today is that the newspaper ended, whereas our news today doesn't end. And then also the thing that made it even harder was in order to pay for it, there was a certain silver coin that you had to use to pay for it, and it was very rare. It's very hard to get. And so even if you could pay for that in exchange for the silver coin, you might not be able to find one. And so that made it even worse. And then finally we had the Townsend Act. The Townsend Act is a tax on paper, paint, lead, glass, tea. Okay? Paper, paint, lead, glass, and tea. And the thing about that is these are everyday items that people used back then every day. Paper, paint, lead, glass, and tea. And the worst part about it is that whenever they what they did with the tax money, what they did with the money that they raised from the taxes is they paid the governors and officials in the colonies, the people that are telling them, hey, you got to do these taxes, you got to do these taxes, you pay this, pay this, pay this. The people that were abusing their rights were the very people that they were paying for to be there. And that was crazy. They also, how did they enforce it? They made these things called writs of assistances. Basically, they're like search warrants. But back then, they really didn't have to give much of a reason for that. And so yeah. So why do we have to know these things? We have to know these things because our government today in the United States, we have fixed those problems. Okay, so we are represented in Congress or the legislative branch. We haven't talked about this yet, but just keep these in your mind. And so we send representatives in Congress, and it's the legislative branch, the representatives, not the president, not the Supreme Court, but the legislative branch who tells us how much taxes we pay. And that could be at the national level or even the state level. And so no more taxation without representation anymore or our consent. The Quartering Act, the Third Amendment got rid of the Quartering Act, and so we don't have to deal with that anymore. And then also the Fourth Amendment dealt with these writs of assistance, where they didn't really have to have much of a reason to search your stuff. But nowadays, the police have to go to a judge and give them a good reason, reasonable suspicion, or probable cause that you or your property has something illegal, or you have done something illegal on that property. And that protects you. And so make sure that you know that for the future. Probably around December, maybe November, we'll start talking about that stuff too. So yeah, I mean that's it. Don't forget that these taxes. Now, what I like to think is like if you put a pot of if you put a pot of water on the stove, and the colonists represent the water, or the water represents the colonists, and as they keep doing these acts, like the Proclamation of 1763, the Appalachian Proclamation can't go west, it starts heating up that water. In other words, these colonists are starting to get very upset. Then you got the Sugar Act and the Quartering Act. It gets even warmer. The Stamp Act, the Townsend Act, it gets even warmer. You can start seeing a little bit of steam coming off of it. These colonists are going to get super, super upset, and eventually they're going to be squeezed so tight that they are going to want to rebel and start their own brand new country and no longer be Englishmen, but become Americans. And that's going to be the American Revolution. And that's all this is building up to. And so, yeah, I just want to let you know that. Hope you have a good day, a good weekend. We'll come back to school on Tuesday. So enjoy your long weekend. Hope you have a great, safe time. We'll see you soon.